Hello, everybody, and welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I am Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. So it's all just about coming back to you. It's all about coming back home, not to an exterior space or outside of you, but within. And that is the best homecoming of all. And today's episode is going to be awesome. I had Liyana Silver on, probably over a year ago. We were talking about the dark night of the soul, which is one of the things that she specializes in teaching. She reached out to me again and said, hey, there's this whole thing happening with the planet now, and I'd love to come back on. So we are going to dive into collective space with the world's dark night of the soul, and what's crumbling and what's seeking to come through. And a lot of you know I love to talk about spiritually bypassing and how sometimes we can get so locked into feeling better and doing things to make us shine and be illuminated and enlightened. But what actually happens is we pass over the needed shadow work that's required for deep personal transformation. So we're going to talk about that today. But Liyana is an author, speaker, mentor, and what she calls quote unquote edge cutter, which I love. So looking at all of our shadowy stuff, tapping into our inner knowing, we're going to totally go there. And y'all know I love to talk about the senses. So she's going to talk about how your sixth senses can help you access your inner goddess. You can find Liyana on liyanasilver.com, and her name is spelled Liyana. I just want to remind you that I am in full-scale launch of Feminine Boss School. It sounds scarier than it actually is. That it's actually a gentle approach to finding your soul path, balancing it all with motherhood or family life, and also accessing your inner goddess confidence. So check that out on femininebossschool.com. And as always, you can get my freebie, a downloadable mini healing kit that actually helps your sensory nourishment practice. So you can find that on cherieburton.com. So without further ado, let's bring on Liyana Silver. Liyana, welcome. And thank you for joining me again. You are the first person I've interviewed twice.
Oh, I feel special. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And when you reached out to me again, I looked at, it seems like your work has deepened even since we spoke last. And so I just, when we first got on this call together, I asked you what's up for you? And I don't usually do that. I don't usually say, okay, what do you want to talk about today? Usually I know where we're going, and I know what you specialize in, and I love it. It's beautiful. But why don't you introduce to our listeners what you told me about hierarchy?
So I just recently had a very important, deep conversation with a friend of mine who is a cultural critic, deep thinker, and was talking about the difficulty I'm experiencing, my clients, my friends, just most of us are experiencing, which is what do we do now when ways of thinking and ways of working, even what we've been doing, are starting to fall apart and don't work? What do we do?
Yeah.
And so part of our conversation landed where she told me this term called hierarchy. And I'd never heard it before. And she explained to me what it is. And so let me do a visual of this. So let's just imagine you're looking out and you've got some horizon. You got some depth. You can see over to the horizon, see a little bit of mountains on the horizon. And then coming over the mountains, you see this huge, Godzilla head poking over. And you just realize how immense and powerful this thing is. If it starts coming toward you, it's going to crush everything in its path, right? And that is sometimes what it feels like to comprehend something like patriarchy, which is a system that inherently says that men and the values and strengths of the masculine are superior and should be dominant over girls and women, and thinking and values of the feminine. And we all exist inside that system. We're trying to make our way out of it, right? And then let's just imagine that another head starts poking up over the horizon, and it is equally huge, and you realize you will get stomped and crushed by it as well. And that is, white supremacist thinking, which is similar, right? It's like it's a distant cousin, and it says that there is one hue, a shade of skin color that is superior over another, and carries with it all these particular ways of being around perfectionism and a way of working in the world. And the thing that happens as you keep looking at this is that if there's not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 separate heads, they belong to the same beast. They belong to this incomprehensibly large, massive, strong beast called chiriarchy. Chiriarchy is like the mono monster that contains all of these things that we're recognizing and trying to unplug from: capitalism, white supremacist thinking, patriarchy, misogyny, homophobia, etc. It is one beast, even though we can see its distinct heads. And the thing is that, like a hydra, which is kind of like the picture I've painted, it's a multi-headed beast. If you cut off one of the heads and you think, oh my gosh, I've slain patriarchy, right? Then one drop of the hydra's blood grows 1,000 hydras, So inherently, we cannot war with the chiriarchy or any facet of it, because it creates more. Right. And we understand how much of the world is colonized like cancer by chiriarchy, and how much of us is colonized by chiriarchy, right? And then so in the face of this, we can't actively fight. What do we
can't fight the masculine with the dark masculine.
Right. As we know, we cannot disassemble the master's house using the master's tools. We cannot solve a problem using the same level of consciousness or thinking that created it, right? Borrowing those really great truisms. So this is what I've been thinking about a lot, just really deeply appreciating all the ways I've been self-educating on all the hydra heads of chiriarchy, and unplugging from them as best I can, and supporting clients and friends and women to do the same. And then what I also got is that the antidote is how we plug out of chiriarchy. What do we plug into? We plug into Ma, right? Ma is the great mother. Ma is the goddess. Ma is the feminine strengths, values, attitudes, principles, and then it lands us right where you and I are, and what we talk about all day.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for that visual, because I'm like, okay, you can't, it's like that Einstein quote, that you mentioned, like, you can't solve something at the level you created it. And that's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and trying to get a different result. And we've done it a certain way. Now there's a new way. When you and I talked last, it was about the dark night of the soul, because I was in it. So I always wanted to talk about it. So grounding to be able to talk to other women who were teaching about it and helping, because because you do go a little crazy. My last podcast episode with Monica Parikh, we talked about you literally do have to go a little crazy to completely wake up and go into this dark tunnel or whatever it looks like. Everybody's so different. So that when you come out on the other side of it, you have new eyes. So can we just revisit that, like, navigation through the dark night a little bit as we move kind of into that reclamation?
Yes. So I'm actually in the middle. So I'm in a very weird place. I have the audiobook of my first book is just out. It's just been released. So I'm kind of revisiting and really in that first book, which is called Feminine Genius. At the same time, I'm researching and writing my second book, which will be on Dark Nights of the Soul. And one of the main chapters I've been working on, I've tentatively titled, like, Am I Crazy? And it is a chapter, and who knows, it might be more, devoted to that part of this experience, which it questions everything that feels sane or secure, or that we have been told what is possible, or that who we are. And that is incredibly shaky. We do have to ask ourselves the question, am I crazy? Am I going crazy? And so as I've been doing that, I've been researching madness and some really interesting work about how ideas in the West around mental illness are imported into other cultures, or watching TED Talks by, young women who are schizophrenic. And I would say that this is a really interesting realm. For the most part, I think the garden variety experience is I'm questioning everything and that feels crazy, right? And then we have to wonder, well, but am I actually mentally unstable? Would I get a diagnosis of something like chemical depression or schizophrenia or something? And the one thing I'm taking away is that there's so much gray area. There's very little in the black and white, and that often what would be called mental instability is a sane reaction to an insane world. And I think it is a sane question to ask, am I going crazy, right? Is you pull yourself out. So here, let me back up a second. We don't go into a dark night of the soul. No one chooses that.
That's why you can tell it's different than just a regular life experience that's stressful or traumatic, because you don't choose it, it chooses you.
No one would choose it. It chooses you. It drags you by the hair into this very disconcerting place. Painful, disconcerting. It might come with unspeakable, unreasonable loss, and what I would say about that is we feel like when things fall apart or we lose such important things that we must be getting punished somehow, right? If things are going wrong, maybe I'm wrong. And one of the things I think is really important to know about a dark night of the soul is, first, like you said, it's undeniable, it's happening, I didn't choose this, but here it is. And the second thing is, it's not a punishment. It sucks, it's painful, but it is an invitation. And I think it is an invitation to a few things, 5 main things. And one of them is, in what ways do you want to unplug from this insane world? That's your invitation. What about your life is just aligned with the insanity, and you're having a sane reaction to an insane world? So let's see what needs to be unplugged from and what needs to be replugged into. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's like that disconnection, so that you go reeling. The only way that my best metaphor for my dark night was I was in this mothership and everything was bright and happy, and I saw spirituality a certain way, and it was a little comfortable, and I had achieved a measure of success or whatever. And I felt like I had everything I needed and everything was great, and I just needed to stay on the ship and everything would be fine. And then I got this inkling, and so I put this astronaut suit on and I tethered. And then as soon as I decided that I wanted to venture, I unhooked the tether and I went hurling into black. And there was an undercurrent of peace in the sense that my higher self was saying, you must do this because you asked for this. I was like, no, I didn't. But as it's like all those questions you ask yourself. And I definitely had the programming that I was doing something wrong or I wasn't worthy. And that's why I was feeling this. And what was so affirming was that people showed up to kind of ground me into like, yep, you're good. You're not crazy. Yeah, well, you are, but it's a good crazy. And you don't to be a sovereign and to find your own inner universe and your own power, worth, and beauty. You cannot be comfortable on that mothership anymore. It's not working for you anymore.
Yeah.
But you love the mothership and it brought you to where you now are. And so I guess what I'm saying is like just that feeling of being untethered and not grounded and reeling is so, and I guess one of the biggest precursors is you just feel so alone.
Yeah. So I think the thing that is so nice about having conversations about things that no one seems to have conversations about is that it starts to, I think one of the most disorienting things is that we feel so alone, or that maybe this is only happening to us. And that being able to have a conversation of not only do other people have this, but this seems to be an important spiritual rite of passage. You aren't lost, you're actually in a place that feels lost, but you're in a place, I call it the world between worlds. This is the place, the shadow world, the underworld. There you are. You're in a place. Almost every human has or will go through this place. And of course we do kind of, journey alone in some sense, even though there's plenty of guides and allies and support we can have as we go. But I think that has been so helpful to me of like, oh, I'm not lost. I'm just in a place where it feels like I'm lost.
Right. But I'm actually really coming home.
I'm really coming home.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think this is a lesser talked about aspect of Ma, of the great mother of the, divine feminine, which is there's a time to grow things and have all those really comfortable, wonderful worldly successes. And then there's a time where the leaves fall off the tree and things go into winter and composting happens, right? Mm-hmm. We bloom and then we rot.
This is the cycle you teach, right?
The cycle.
Yeah. Cycle of creation.
Yes, exactly. And that isn't a sign that we've done something wrong and that we deserve to lose all our comforts. It's a sign that we are alive and perhaps plugged into more what is true. What is true for us, and what is a home that is not out there, but in here.
And that's the great mystery. Mm-hmm. That's what we cannot learn on the mothership.
Right.
So you teach a lot about, in that cycle of creation and the full embrace, navigating through that dark night, you teach a lot about coming back into sexuality with this instinctual intelligence. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's super pivotal. That's another threat to the mothership, I guess, that's maybe misunderstood, or because we've had this patriarchal regime at play, they don't understand the sacredness of feminine sexuality and the power of creation there. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Definitely. Probably top on the list of ways that women are confused, oppressed, exploited would be sexuality. Nothing will sell a can of beer or a car or pretty much anything besides the appearance of a sexually available woman or girl, right? It is, and in fact, one of the oldest inside chirarchy, one of the oldest contracts is my money will buy your sexuality. And so what I feel like is what we're left with is so much wounding around this area, which is essentially our expression of life force energy. It's our creative life force energy that's been kind of like packaged, commodified, and all twisted up into knots, right?
Yep.
So yes, I think one of the things this may happen is maybe one of the real hearts of a dark night of the soul is, where is my sexuality? Like, I've been told my whole life how to appear sexy, or not too sexy, or just the right amount of sexy, or maybe I've been hiding my sexuality. That feels a little safer.
Because desire is a huge piece of the feminine. We want to feel desirable.
Yes.
And so it's like, how do you do that in this world in a healthy way? And we don't know that we're not shown that. We're not shown it in religion. We're not shown it in school. Definitely not in the media. Not at home.
Not. No, well, here you said it exactly right. We are taught do whatever you need to do to yourself, to your body, to your own desires, hungers, to what you say, what you feel, how you act, how you dress. Do whatever you got to do. Dominate yourself in whatever way you have to, so that you are desirable by the culture, usually by a man. Not always, but that's it. It's not what you desire, not what you feel, not what you want, not what brings you joy or pleasure or what is your unique expression. Are you desirable? It has nothing to do with you. It is how can you manipulate your experience so that others find you desirable? This is this very weird prison we're trying to get ourselves out of. And I think one of the ways, you said it a few moments ago, is understanding we got to reach back about 5,000 years when it was commonplace, it was understood that sexuality and spirituality, or the sacredness of sexuality, was not a confusing concept. That's just what was. That sexuality, sensuality was seen as sacred. It wasn't something that are on polar opposites, right? We have this idea from many religious and spiritual traditions that sexuality somehow traps you in a confusing animal or human nature, and you must dominate or transcend that in order to get to a higher plane of spiritual consciousness. They don't exist on the same plane. And part of it is to say, oh, no, they sure do. They sure do. So just one thing, one little piece of interesting breadcrumb to get us on this conversation. So if you think of where most of our sexual organs are, not all, most, they're in your pelvis, right? There's the bones right there at the top of your legs and at the bottom of your spine. And so often it's called the pelvic bowl. So there's these bones of the pelvis that are the sacrum in the back. If you reach around in the back, there's kind of this little plate at the right above your butt. That's your sacrum. And on either side are your pelvic bones. And so the word sacrum comes from the word that means sacred. And the word pelvis, it means cup or bowl or vessel. And so back when folks were naming stuff, they named this the sacred vessel. And that doesn't mean just sacred to make babies, right? It's a sacred vessel. So it was really understood that to be involved in conscious sacred sexuality was a portal to divine union. It wasn't straying from sacredness. It was actually a pathway to sacredness. So this can be a lengthy reclamation, but this is an incredible reclamation for us as girls and women, that really, what do I feel? What is sexy? When do I feel sexy? What do I want? What brings me pleasure? What if what I had here in my pelvis was sacred? And those questions, I think, begin the part of the liberation around sexuality. Yeah.
I love that sacred bowl. One of my teachers, she talks a lot about the sacred container of the feminine and the vessel and all of that sacred chalice stuff. I mean, it's all womb energy. It's all depth of creativity and life force. It's really, I believe you'd agree with me here, that the heart is the beautiful center of the body in terms of connection or whatever, but the womb is the holy of holies for a woman. Okay, so how does a woman, from a practical standpoint, I mean, because you can hear all this, right? We hear new teachers like you coming forward and saying, yes, there's so much wisdom there. There's so much intelligence. You don't have to be at war with your sexuality and whatever. then how does a woman actually claim that and feel that and not shame herself? And are you following me?
Absolutely. And I will say, just by the way, just in case whoever's listening might not identify as a woman, might not have a uterus.
Right.
So I just want to say that, it's sometimes the really amazing things that happens with the actual reproductive organs, and doesn't mean you're any less sacred or have any less of this energy if you don't have those particular organs for whatever reason. So I just want to be clear about that too.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I love this question to ask. So just to ground really in the practical, to start this whole conversation of reclaiming this. So I call it the pleasure question. And I go into more detail into it in my book or, here and there, but the pleasure question is fairly simple, and it can have really profound effects as we engage with it and answer it. So the pleasure question is, how can I make or allow, you can decide which one you want, what level of activity, how can I make this moment more pleasurable for myself? How can I allow this moment to be more pleasurable for myself? Either way works. So this is a question that, now pleasure can be sexual, sensual, platonic pleasure. It doesn't really matter. So really, like you and I here, we're both in front of auditory recording devices, maybe in offices, and who knows where we are, right? We're not necessarily in an intimate sexual situation. Maybe not the height of we're not walking through a field of flowers or something, right? We can ask it right now. In a moment that might be mundane or might not be so much about pleasure, we could both say, how can I make this moment more pleasurable for myself? And I can ask you in a sec, maybe my answer would be, maybe I would open the window a little bit more, and then I could feel the breeze that's coming through, and it would kind of, run over my skin a little bit, freshen up the air. That would feel really nice to me. Do you have one that might come in the moment? It's so
interesting that you brought this up, because I'm trying to live sensually, which means not just sexually, but just how can I engage my senses, especially when I'm staring at a computer screen or in a, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I got my essential oils over here. I got my Creo brew, which is a cacao mixture I make in the morning. That is just yummy to me. So I've been doing that as we've been talking, like taking a sip, doing a little tapping, putting the oils in. But I've also been gazing outside, because outside my office, there's just a beautiful blue sky. I can't see any clouds and just this green tree. So it's like, what am I smelling? What am I tasting? What am I looking at? What am I listening to? And this is yummy listening, by the way, what we're talking about. So I feel totally filled up. Yeah. Essentially, to me, means that question that you asked, which is gorgeous. How can I allow this moment to be more pleasurable for myself? I ask myself a similar question. It's like, how can I live sensually right now?
And honestly, it's different words for the same thing. So I'm so glad you said that. We're all going to define pleasure differently, but I think pleasure is being able to widen the aperture of our senses, take in more, increase the richness of what we are experiencing through our 5 and maybe 6 senses.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we got. We might have more. I think we might have more than 6, but I don't have names for them yet. I don't have names yet.
Well, right? I teach multisensory healing, so that there's a spiritual and a physical pathway for all the senses. So for instance, there's clairaudience, clairsentience, all of those things are related to the 5 physical senses, but you mentioned a 6th sense, which I believe is our higher self.
Yes.
Spirit, what comes through that can't be tangibly accessed. But the other 5 senses open that.
Exactly. Yes. Well, beautifully said, that there's sort of 2 sides to one coin. And I think that, if we talk about plugging into Ma, into the goddess, into the great mother, you know, one of the ways is through the sensual. And so if you say, how can I live sensually in this moment? How can I make this or allow this moment to be more pleasurable? We ask it on the, if you are on a grocery line, I don't know if you can leave your home to go get groceries, but if you're on the grocery line or you're waiting on a call or you're, you know, trying to referee a fight between your kids, it all counts. And I suggest asking it as many times a day as you can. Mm-hmm. And I love the ways you were saying you were answering it. You're like, yeah, I'm going to rub this essential oil on and drink this cacao brew and magic. Yes, 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 yes to all that. And I think we ask it to ourselves in sensually sexual situations with ourselves, with other people, to say, how can I be more focused on my senses and my pleasure at this moment?
I think, and you mentioned, and you teach this, that you have an oracle between your thighs. And when I first heard that, I was like, okay, so maybe you can expound on that.
Yes, okay. An oracle, you probably, you know, listeners probably know, is a source of guidance, a source of spiritual wisdom or guidance. Usually in times of old, this oracle was a person, often a woman, sometimes a man, sometimes a two-spirit person, sometimes it was a grove or a spring or some sacred site. But the idea was that when you had a question or needed guidance on something, you went to this outside source, not to yourself, you went to this authority that was said to be the mouthpiece to God, mouthpiece to the divine, or to wisdom, right? You got a question, go to the oracle, you'll get your answer. So part of what I'm saying is that this is not a new concept. You don't have to go to the authority figure. You yourself can find the answers. And in fact, who would know but you, right? That you do have a source of guidance and wisdom within you. Most people are hip to that idea. And so the idea of it being between your thighs, not only is it not the wizened woman in the cave on the hill, it's between your thighs, right? It's in your sensual, sexual, creative center.
Those lower chakra centers we typically think of as shameful, or and it's what I always teach about, like, you can't be grounded when those lower chakra centers, or you disassociate from them or shame them. You can't be here on this earth. You can't be happy. You can't do your work. Right, exactly. And it is what we're talking about, the oracle, where I'm directing, right? When I say between your thighs, I mean whatever amount of reproductive organs that you have in your sacred vessel, right? In between your pelvis and your sacrum. This area that was and is named sacred, that we have been taught is shameful and profane. And so, yes, it's not only that we've cast this part of our bodies and our psyches out and we need to call it home, but actually I believe it is a center of wisdom. You absolutely can consult your heart. You absolutely can consult your third eye. You absolutely can consult your gut. And you can consult the oracle between your thighs. So I'll give you this really interesting medical scientific example. This I read about in a book called Vagina by Naomi Wolf, which is a really wonderful book. I have heard of that. Yes. Naomi Wolf is amazing.
She is. Now it's slightly academic, so you just got to put your academic hat on and read, but it's invaluable. I really recommend everybody read it. And in it, she talks about this medical device. I've never encountered one, called a vaginal photometer, and it measures pulsations in the human vagina. And what that is that they've discovered that there are pulses distinct from your circulatory system, distinct from what pulses might happen with your heartbeat, that there are measurable pulses inside the human vagina. Now, this concept you can understand it because in acupuncture or traditional Chinese medicine, those practitioners are trained to feel and sense the pulses of the different organ systems, not just the heart, but also the spleen or also the kidney or et cetera. And so when they put their fingers on your wrist, they're not only feeling for the pulse like a allopathic nurse or doctor would, but they're also feeling, they're moving their fingers a little bit like, oh, your spleen chi is a little bit sleepy, and oh, your gallbladder chi is a little, right? Like this, they can sense the pulsation systems in your body, not just your heart. So apparently this medical device, vaginal photometer, does the same. Now the pulsation, the little pulses in the human vagina increase in speed and intensity when the person who has that vagina, we'll call her a woman, but that's not always the case, right? Mm-hmm. The person who owns that vagina is inspired or is proud or is deep, like is connected to like their child that they love so much, that when you say, what do you care about? What do you love? What are you fiercely devoted to? You know, like, what did you, like this incredible, inspiring energy, this woman, this owner of the vagina, her vagina will say this, right? Like there will be a confirmation in her body.
So
I know,
interesting. That's
right?
So interesting.
Yeah. And a lot of women, when I say this, they're like, oh, that's what that is. Right? They've actually sort of noticed it before. Some of us are not paying attention to anything below the belly button, but, and that's fine. That's fine. Some women are like, oh, that's what that is. And so that's part of what I'm saying, is that there is part of your body that knows, that is deeply connected to your inner knowing and knows what you love and or care about or are inspired about and are passionate about. Just like your gut knows certain things, just like your heart knows certain things. So that is what I mean by the aura.
Beautiful. It just reminds me of like just that deep knowing that surpasses logic, which is exactly what the feminine is. It's not linear. It's not logic. There's a flow to it versus an order to it.
Yes.
I want to, as we kind of come back to this, like, am I crazy conversation?
Yeah.
I feel like accessing that lower, like putting your feet on the earth, like being in your sexual energy. And I want to also emphasize, because I had a teacher teach me this last year, and I was like, wow, your sexuality is not for other people. Your sexuality is for you. It's part of your sovereignty. And you say that to some people and it's super triggering because they're like, well, they just have visions of like, I don't know, the sin around that selfishness, or even the prospect of masturbation or anything around self-pleasure, whatever, is just like super taboo to even talk about. But when I say your sexuality is for you, it means you own that power. No one, you can't outsource it. It's your power. But let's come back to the madness part, because I have this book called Women in Madness, and it's written by Phyllis Chesler, and she wrote it in the 70s in kind of that first wave of feminism. And it was 30 years ago. She just did another edition for what she calls, we're kind of like in the third or fourth wave of feminism, which is a different kind of feminism. It's the reclamation of that true wisdom and power, but she's more in the she was more of like a clinician. But I just want to read this, and as we kind of round out our discussion about the crazy, the mad woman, because oftentimes it's the most awake person in the family is the black sheep. Is black sheep listed?
Yeah.
Okay. So she says, and she works like, there's a woman named Elizabeth Packard, who worked with mental patients and married women. And she said, no person shall be regarded or treated as an insane person or a monomaniac, what she calls it, simply for the expression of opinions, no matter how absurd these opinions may appear to others. So she was trying to do that whole First Amendment thing with women, but she noted, it is a crime against human progress to allow reformers to be treated as monomaniacs. Now, a monomaniac is someone who's like deeply entrenched in that mothership. And they're in a mania with it. Like it's this one way. Yeah. But a reformer comes along. So anyway, she said, if the pioneers of truth are thus liable to lose their personal liberty, who will dare to be true to the inspirations of the divinity within them? So I just love that, like, the people who say yes look the craziest oftentimes.
Yes. Yes.
And they are accessing something so deep that it transcends the old logical paradigms.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, just a big yes. And because we live inside hierarchy that disenfranchises women and girls and anybody on the margins, anybody who's other, any reaction that points that out is going to be seen as deviant and crazy. And yet, those are sane reactions to an insane world. Yeah.
And I just love that quote because insane, if you're going crazy, you're having a sane reaction to an insane world. I lost a sister to suicide. I believe she was totally awake. And she was labeled all these things, but she was the most loving, one of the most loving people I've ever met. Super non-judgmental. Of course, her legacy is suicide, but I choose not to see it as such. I choose to see that she was the most awake, one of the most awake people. She didn't fit on the mothership.
Right.
So instead, and her untether was suicide, unfortunately.
Right.
And
which is an instinct many of us get. We get that.
Yes. I believe that a lot of these systems are literally driving people insane.
Yeah.
And there's good insanity and there's lost. And so the good insanity would be like, okay, I'm supported and held in this darkness. I don't love it. Nothing's working, but I know that there's an end to it. Suicide is, there will never be an end to this. This is completely hopeless. This will never heal. And even though I was suicidal when I was in that time. However, I think the difference is like when you surrender to it, then the tools show up, the people show up, the people to ground you show up.
Yes. And I know we're running out of time. Let me say this one thing too, which is the way that you speak about this, it has a curiosity and a kindness. And this is another thing I've been taking out of the research I've been doing, that people who encounter, when they're having some kind of mental distress and they encounter a system that says, oh, that's a pathology and we need to, something deeply wrong with you. Let's fix you. Then it gets worse. And then when they encounter people, healers, et cetera, who have that kind of curiosity and kindness and go, you might be having a sane reaction to an insane world. All of this is as a cry for not knowing how to deal with things. That kind of relationship, which is, it is the opposite, is the antidote to domination. It's not like you're really crazy, let's dominate this out of you. It's let us understand what is going on with you.
Teach us.
Yeah.
Making them, I love that, making them feel like they are the expert of their experience rather than so broken and lost and labeled, bipolar runs in my family like you wouldn't believe. And they are, these relatives I have and siblings, like some of the most creative, beautiful, loving souls. They're not crazy.
Right. And this attitude, whether we have an attitude toward them or toward ourselves of domination, or if we unplug, right, and go into an attitude of kindness and curiosity and support, makes all the difference.
Curiosity. I love that. That word comes up a lot with some of the influencers I talk to. The wonder, being in wonder, being in inquiry, being curious. It's so powerful. The dark masculine knows it all. They wouldn't question because they're the experts, right? In the dark masculine paradigm, the feminine is that just opening, right? To, I wonder if ...
Yes.
And that's how children are. They are alive with that wonder. Liyana, how can our listeners find you and what beautiful offerings do you have right now?
Yeah. I'm at liyanasilver.com. That's my website. And right now, we'll see if you're listening to this in the nice time window. late August, early September.
Yeah, that's about when it'll air.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So the audiobook of Feminine Genius was just released, and it'll be available for whenever, which is wonderful. But if you want to buy it, in this time window, I'm offering a free month of masterclasses based on the principles and practices in that book, which are much of what we talked about, how to connect with inner knowing and sensuality, and literally unplug from hierarchy and into Ma. And so you can find out more about that fun bonus at it's fgaudiobook.com. So Feminine Genius audiobook.com.
Great.
Yes. Otherwise, I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I don't know how much longer, but for right now, I'm there. So those are good places to find me. And please do. I can't wait to be found by you. Yes.
Well, I just honor you for coming back into my space, because I never take lightly who shows up, especially someone as wise and soulful as you are, doing so much for the feminine on this planet. And so thank you for reaching out to me again. And we'll call this part 2 of the Dark Night, because part 1, we revisited that. We're revisiting our first episode of the Dark Night that you did with me. And I think you and I have learned a lot of life and experienced a lot of life since then. It was probably about a year-ish ago, year and a half ago.
A year. Yeah. Something like that. And then we'll probably have part 3. I don't know. Maybe I'll break another record and be invited back for part 3.
And we'll know when that is. You'll know when that is. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for who you are in the world and the work you're doing, and for visiting with us today and sharing.
Thank you so much for all that you're doing and inviting me back.
Hey, thanks for listening. And remember, if you feel like you're going crazy, you're just having a sane reaction to an insane world. While it can feel so disorienting, you're not alone. You're not lost. As you continue to express through your sacred bowl, your creative center, what makes you alive as a woman, this is where all of these old structures and all of this old way of being and doing and feeling is kind of going by the wayside. I love how Liyana said to pose a question to yourself, which is, how can I allow this moment to be more pleasurable for myself? How can I live more in my senses? Because this is what accesses the great goddess. Have an absolutely glorious week, and we'll talk to you next Wednesday on Women Seeking Wholeness.